My name's Sam. I'm the Partnerships and Communications Manager here at Fairygodboss. And Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency, and we offer a ton of great free resources like anonymous company reviews, job listings, virtual recruiting events, and so much more to help you succeed throughout your career. Before we get started, we will be taking questions during the second half of today's webinar. You'll find that Q&A button. It's at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to leave questions as yourself or anonymously. We will try to answer as many as possible, again, during the second half of the presentation. We're also recording today's webinar, and we'll be sending it out in a follow-up email later today, so be on the lookout for it. So if you miss anything, you want to share it with a friend, you'll have the ability to do so. Here with me today is Elizabeth Borelli. Elizabeth is the founder of NextCareer Coaching and has remained a top-ranked career counselor for multinational talent conglomerate Lee Hecht Harrison since 2016. Thanks so much for being here today, Elizabeth. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm really excited to be here and share this information. We'll be covering a lot of content in a short period of time today, so rest assured. There is a comprehensive interview guide that you can access at the end of this session that reiterates a lot of the content we'll be discussing today. So no need to take notes. Just, enjoy the webinar, and I'm excited to share these best practices with you. So starting off with how to ace your virtual job interview. You got the interview, congratulations. Now, lots of times that is a mixed bag, the interview invitation, because it brings about a lot of nervousness too. Most people are nervous when they interview. It's not something we do every day. So I invite you to reframe your interview jitters into thinking about this as a two-way conversation. Not only is the hiring manager interviewing you, you're also interviewing the hiring manager to find out whether this is the right organization, the right role, and also to listen for cues about how you'll be able to contribute to the organization and the role. And that will help you frame the conversation during the interview. So of course it's normal to be nervous, but when we start thinking of this as a conversation instead of just spotlight on you, it can help alleviate some of those nerves. So let's get started. Of course, we want to start before we do anything further by preparing in advance. Now, some of these tips I'm sure you'll be familiar with, so I'll just give a brief nod to them. And of course, preparing, getting to know the company, looking on their LinkedIn page, reviewing their website is pretty 101, and most people are familiar with that best practice. You also want to get to know the job description line by line. You may not have done every requirement listed, but you want to be able to speak to those. So if it's a requirement that you haven't done before, what is an example of something that shows you can handle that task or requirement? So something similar that you did that you can share, or an example of how you quickly ramped up in another role to learn things very quickly. So it will give the hiring manager a really confident feeling that you'll be able to get this. You want to practice your answers to the most common interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about a time when, fill in the blank. And tell me why you want to work here. Why us? Why this company? So you really want to have those answers dialed in. Now remember, the beginning and end of any conversation is what's most memorable. So you want to start with a strong beginning, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And you want to prepare your stories. So I'll speak briefly here to the tell me about a time story. And typically this is a part of most interviews, maybe every interview. The interviewer wants to know how you are going to respond to a challenging situation in that role. So for every job, there's a pain point. So it could be, if you're customer facing, it could be, tell me about a time when you overcame a customer challenge or helped an irate customer to manage their problem. Or perhaps if you are a project manager, tell me about a time when the project got derailed or was not going to be completed on time. So in any role, again, think about the pain point and think about a story about how you addressed that problem and provided a solution. We think in stories, so the more that you can, or we think in pictures, so the more that you can share your experience in stories, the more memorable you'll be. And that's really the goal in this new medium. It's hard to, from an interviewer's perspective, they're speaking with so many people, they may be interviewing up to 10 people for the same role. How are you going to stand out? Stand out through your story. So really put the time into developing strong ones. So those are the basics, but what if you want to take it to the next level, which I suggest you do? So one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Glassdoor, or if you do a Google search, you can often get answers to some of the interview questions that you'll be asked for specific companies. So for example, I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and one of our big employers is Nike. So sorry, Amazon, Nike is too, but for this example, I was going to share that Amazon has a very specific formula for how they interview. And you can Google and find the questions that they're frequently asking. So you can do that research and get a step ahead on how you'll prepare your answers, because a lot of times if you Google the organization or look on Glassdoor, you can find what the questions are going to be, or look to your network for preparation tips. So if you know somebody that works at the organization, ask them about the interview process. It's a great way to prepare. Another way to take it to the next level is to familiarize yourself with organizational priorities and goals. So you can find that by doing some online research, Googling the company, reading the business journal, looking at articles and business publications about what is this organization, where are they headed, how are they hoping to grow. And when you can bring that into the conversation, you're perceived as that much more of an insider already before you've even gotten the job. So if you have any other tips that you want to share, please feel free to leave them in the comments, because I don't know all the answers, and it's a great way to help the rest of the people in the community get even more up to speed on some of these interview preparation tips. Now, the salary question. This is one most people are uncomfortable with, and frequently it comes up before you're ready. There's a reason that hiring managers do this. They know if they catch you off guard, and it might not even be the hiring manager, it might be the recruiter. It could be as early as the first conversation you have when you get that call asking if you're still available and interested in interviewing. You might get asked right off the bat, what are your salary expectations? Don't get thrown by that question. The reason they're asking you is because they know if they catch you off guard and you want the job, you're likely to answer low. And once you answer, it's done. They'll hold you to that number. So you want to take your time here. Know what the salary range is for the role. If you can, do some research. Again, Glassdoor, but they're not always accurate in their salary ranges. Glassdoor.com, sorry, I should have explained this earlier, is a resource to learn more about organizations, including what employees say about them, but there's a lot of other information. The accuracy is not always 100%. I wouldn't rely on it for salary data per se. I wouldn't stop there. One other way to determine what to ask is just ask for what you were being paid at your last role and add a little bit on, like 5%. Answering with a higher number than maybe you're even comfortable with is not going to put you out of the running. It's not going to disqualify you. You'll be perceived as a more valuable employee, and employers are not afraid to negotiate for the employee they want. So if you answer high, they're not going to say, oh, forget it. She's out of the range. We're not going to speak to her. They're going to go, oh, okay, I really want to talk to this person. Her salary expectation is a little high, but I bet she'll negotiate. It adds value to their perception of you. So if you're not comfortable coming with the number, you don't have any idea, maybe you did your research, you don't have any idea of which number to throw out there, you can ask for a range. One good way to do this is to say, salary is not the only consideration for me when I'm evaluating a job offer. I'd like to know more about the package and the role before I answer. Do you have a range for this job? So in whatever way you're comfortable asking, you want to let them know that you can't really answer with a number because you don't know the full package. There's also benefits to consider, vacation time, and you want to have that clear understanding before you just throw out a number. If you can get the range, then you're able to answer at the high end of the range, always leaving yourself some room for negotiation. And again, any other best practices, please share them in the comments.
Hey, Elizabeth, I'm just jumping in for 1 second.
Sure.
Ingrid left a great comment in the chat. She said, work with a trusted accountability partner and or a professional in your network to do a mock interview or a practice run. Then you can kind of review some constructive feedback to prepare for your actual interview.
Absolutely. The more you practice, the more confident you're going to be, the more you're going to be able to catch anything that comes up. Maybe it's you didn't know you had a nervous gesture, or you weren't speaking as clearly as you wanted to be. So the more you practice, especially if you can practice with someone else, the better. Thank you for that feedback. So now here we go on to our virtual interview setup. You want to start by setting up your space, and critical here is your camera. So if you have a camera built into your laptop, it may not be at the angle that will convey you in the best possible light. So you want to practice with that. If it's all that you've got, then make it work. Make sure you set it up at eye level so you're looking into the camera always, not at the screen, because otherwise someone might be looking at the top of your head. You want them to, even though you're not looking directly into their face because their face is on the screen, you're looking at a camera, you still give the perception of looking them in the eye, which is really what we want to do during the job interview. Now, background. I know this is challenging for people. So we're all of a sudden thrown into this space. Most of us, when we had to start working virtually or remotely, weren't prepared. We didn't have our space set up. I know I was working out of my office, which doubles as a guest room, so I had a bed in the background. So it's really important to find a space. This is my dining room, and I just reorganized it a little bit for when I do these kind of webinars or conferences. But find a space that works for you. So whether it is a space with a background that you can reformat to make to do more of a clean professional presentation, that's a good option. Or if you don't have that in your apartment or house, you can do a DIY background with a sheet, and there's lots of good resources online to learn how to just do a blank, plain background by using a sheet and setting it up to cover up whatever else is behind you that might be distracting or give the perception of disorganization. So clean is the way to go in terms of your background. I don't suggest using those virtual backgrounds. I think they're distracting and they're very obviously not a real background. So it's just not necessarily the best way to keep the focus on you. So that's why clean, so we can focus, or the interviewer can focus on you. Lighting is important too. So you don't want to have overhead lighting or lighting behind you. It casts a lot of shadows. So right now I'm using a ring light. I just happen to have a ring light, fortunately, because I do a lot of webinars. But it could just be a lamp set behind your computer, or you can sit facing a window so that natural light or artificial light is coming in towards your face, eliminating any shadows that might be otherwise cast. In terms of framing, where do you want to be in the video? Where do you want the video frame to be? And you don't want it just focused on your face. You don't want to be a talking head. So if you can do from your core up, that gives you the opportunity. You want the interviewer to be able to see your hands. So you can make hand gestures. You can communicate using more body language, and that emphasizes your communication. It makes it more natural. It makes it seem more like an in-person interview, which is what we want as much as possible. And of course, practicing. So like you mentioned earlier, Sam, thank you for that comment. We really want to practice, especially with our setup. We don't want to go in and just set up right before the interview and find out we have a technical challenge or the lighting's bad. Really put the time in, do your research. If you need any extra equipment, for example, a camera, I have a resource at the end of this presentation in the comprehensive interview tip sheet on where to find a camera. The Logitech cameras remote cameras are really good. And I know right now it's challenging to find any home office equipment, but there is a link to a Logitech camera that will do the trick perfectly. You don't need to overspend. So, make the investment. It is worth it, especially if this is the job. This is going to make the difference between you showing up professionally or not. So can't emphasize enough how important it is to prepare your space. And if anybody has any feedback or other suggestions, put them in the comments. We'd love to hear them. Okay, so show up for success. Your space is prepared, your appearance. Now, your appearance is, of course, always important in an interview, but during the virtual interview, you want to make sure everything's just crisp and clean, no distractions. So pretty basic, clean. If you can do some color, you don't want to wear black necessarily. It's going to blend in, or something too somber. A little bit of color is always good. A little bit of contrast will help as well. But show up professionally, of course, as you normally would. And an extra little special tip for this is check the website or check in with your network. Find out what the normal dress is for that organization and go a step up. So if they're business casual, business attire. If they're casual, you can show up in business casual. You want to look like you took the time and made the effort, but also that you're going to fit right into the culture. So we want to look like you're able to walk right into the organization, even though it's remote. Eventually, we, hopefully we'll be back on site, and you want to look like you're a good fit for the culture. And a lot of that is going to be based on your appearance. So important. Now, hand placement. This is something you want to think about in advance, because there are certain postures or hand gestures that are going to be sending messages. For example, closed off, challenging. So you really want to just have your hands relaxed and on the table. Again, when we can see people's hands, it makes there's an element of trust involved in seeing people's hands. So we want just our hands placed on the table. I would sit the way you normally would for an interview. I'm standing right now, but you would sit, I recommend sitting during the interview, and just hands in front of you on the table. If you want to gesture with your hands, that's always good too, and just natural hand movements. Your facial expression, again, something to think about. If we're not paying attention, we maybe like that, like that. We want to do just a calm, relaxed expression, pleasant expression, something to be conscious of while you're not talking, of how you're going to show up. And then again, you want to always look at the camera, not the screen. And this will take some practice. It's really it's uncomfortable to be looking at a camera when there's no one looking back at you and the screen is right there with someone looking back at you. So take some time to practice so that you're much more comfortable looking at the camera and not seeing the person's face responding to everything you're saying. It takes some getting used to, but it's definitely worth the practice. And another fun preparation tip is to get grounded. Now, even if you don't have a cute suit like that, you can still do a power pose. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with, maybe leave in the comments, how many people are familiar with Amy Cuddy, the researcher who introduced power posing a few years back. And there's tons of videos and tutorials online about how to power pose, but it's really easy. Essentially, this is one of the power poses. I won't demonstrate all of them, but this is one called the Wonder Woman stance. And if you stand for 90 seconds like this, the idea is that it naturally raises your testosterone levels so that you show up more confidently in the interview. And that's the key, because when you convey confidence, the interviewer is going to believe that you're confident that you can do the role. If you show up nervously or feeling, uncertain, your posture is a little off, or, not confident, if your posture is not showing up confidently, then you're undermining your chances of getting the role, because again, how you show up is what the interviewer is going to believe in terms of your ability and credibility. Confident is the way to go. Mind map. So you may have heard this term described differently, but mind mapping is when you envision yourself going through the interview, completing the process, having the conversation, doing a great job, and acing the interview. So you imagine yourself going through all of the steps of the interview and doing a great job. That makes you much more comfortable and prepared and confident when you show up and actually do it. 4-part breathing. So when we're nervous, we breathe shallowly, but there's a way to overcome our nerves by breathing deeply, and it's called 4-part breathing. There's a lot of different versions of this, but one easy one is to remember just to breathe in for the count of 4, hold for 2, breathe out again for the count of 4. This is a way to naturally calm the autonomic nervous system. I already feel calmer. So it's a good way to, during the interview, make sure that you're calm, grounded, and more present for the interview. Any other tips? Please share them. We'd love to hear them. Again, the first part of any conversation, critical, first and last part. So we want to open with confidence, smiling, normal introduction greeting. Hi, Jane, it's a pleasure to meet you. Glad to be here, kind of thing, just like you normally would in a regular interview. And again, paying attention to your breathing. You'll likely be nervous, but you can calm your nerves by doing those breathing techniques. Now, here is something you may not have heard before, and I've just started hearing it in interview best practices. It's really important to start off the interview by gaining clarity about the main focus for this role. Now, we often think, and typically the way the interview is structured, is you're asked questions in the beginning, and then you get to ask questions in the end. But if you walk into the interview and say, hi, Jane, thanks for inviting me in for the interview. I've really thoroughly read the job description, but I'm not clear on the main focus for the role. Could you share what the main focus for this role is? In your own words, of course, that you've practiced. But what you want to do is get a clearer understanding of what's important for this role. And just last week, I had a new client come to me. He had been a finalist, 6 interviews between him, and it was between him and another person for a job. It was a sales job. So this guy was a driver, a confident sales guy. He didn't get the job. And then he was able to get some feedback after the interview about what happened, why didn't he get the job? He thought he interviewed perfectly. The feedback was that he was too sales focused. This was a sales role, but the organization was looking for someone that was more customer focused, customer support focused. Even though he interviewed based on what he understood from the job description, the main focus of the role was, it wasn't. And frequently the job description isn't written by the hiring manager. It might be written by somebody that has not even any idea about the role. They don't really understand or know the role. They're just writing, that's their job, is just to write job descriptions and post them. So you want to get from the hiring manager what the main focus is, so you can tailor your responses to that main focus and how you'll address them. Now, the last one is, what do you have in common? Of course, interviewers, hiring managers, people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. Of course, the interview process is a very small, short, limited time to get to know somebody, and never mind get to know, like, and trust them. So during the interview process, the interviewer or hiring manager is looking for cues about what kind of person you are, and where you can find things in commonality. You will naturally build trust. So, for example, if you see on the wall behind them that they have pictures of their kids, and you have children the same age, mention it. If you have a referral in common, if you have someone in your network that you both know, mention it. So anything that you can glean that you have in common with this person, you'll want to mention, because that will build rapport. And building rapport is critical to getting the offer. Companies are looking for people, hiring managers are looking for people that are going to be a good fit for their organization. And that's what they'll look for you. That's what they'll look for in you. How will this person walk into the organization and be a perfect fit? So I'm going to go off-road a little bit here and talk about a question that I commonly ask in interview workshops. And it's, can you think of someone in a past organization that you've worked with that was a difficult person, a challenging person? Maybe they were a complainer. Maybe they never took the initiative, and kind of, when they didn't know what to do or how to resolve a problem, just didn't do anything. They shut down. Maybe they were on Facebook all the time. We can all think of someone in an organization that was a challenging person to work with, but someone hired that person. A hiring manager offered that person the job thinking that they were going to be a great fit for the culture. Probably they had great experience, they had great skill set, but as an employee, they were terrible. So that is always in the back of the hiring manager's mind. It's risky being a hiring manager. You have to determine in a very short amount of time whether the person that you're interviewing is going to really be who they say they are, if they're really going to be a valuable asset to your team, or if they're going to be that person complaining and gossiping, or who's always sick. So these are things that you can't really tell necessarily from a resume or a job or a LinkedIn profile, even from referrals. So they're looking for cues to build trust and rapport. So definitely help them by giving them those cues and pointing out those commonalities. Now, you want to communicate credibility. Again, more rapport building, more trust building. So one way to do this in conversations is to mirror the tone and the pace of the interviewer. This doesn't mean copying everything they're doing. This just means if they're speaking slowly, adjust your pace accordingly. If they're speaking really quickly and they're high energy, you also want to adjust your pace accordingly. Maybe this is a high energy organization. This doesn't mean faking who you are. It just means relating and building rapport, because that is how they communicate. And so that is how they'll they'll best perceive communication in a way that will benefit you. So just help them to build rapport with you by doing this subtle, very subtle mirroring. And again, use natural hand gestures and read cues. So if somebody looks like they're confused, maybe stop and say, did I answer that question fully? Or is there anything else you'd like to know? If someone looks bored, maybe your answers are too long. So read their facial cues and see how you can adjust your communication accordingly. You want to avoid upspeak and disclaimers. So disclaimers are things like, I just really enjoy the job that I'm doing, the word just. So when you say just, it undermines your credibility. Just is a big disclaimer, and a lot of people do it. Or try. I'll try and see what I can do, instead of I'll see what I can do. So where there's words like just and try, or there's others as well, but see if you can remove them from your language during the interview. You want to be crisp and concise and compelling. Upspeak is when you have a lilt in your voice at the end of a sentence. So I was a project manager. I worked at my organization for 6 years. And this is a speaking style that some people use subconsciously. So this is another good reason to practice. But again, it undermines your credibility when you do that. So crisp and concise, under 90 seconds. Unless you're telling a great story and you can see that the interviewer is really engaged, then keep going. Remember, stories are what's going to make you more memorable and paint a clearer picture of how you'll be in the organization. Did anyone have any questions about that? If you do, please feel free to post them in the comments. Okay, let's keep going. Now, compelling questions. There are a lot of compelling questions that you can ask, and you want to be prepared with at least 5. Questions like these make you reflect really positively on you, and also, again, enable you to speak to how you'll perform based on the responses. So one great question is, what is the most important function of this role? If you got that answer at the beginning of the interview, maybe skip that one and go right to what are the biggest challenges the person in this role will face? Can you describe a typical day or week? What would a successful first year in the position look like? How will the success of this person be measured in the role? So these are some examples, and they're in the comprehensive video guide. So you can, and this is one of the benefits of remote interviewing, is that you can post-it notes next to your computer or on the wall behind it. So you can have cues that will help you to remember what you want to ask. So you're not trying to memorize everything at the last minute. You can focus more on the conversation. So definitely come prepared with a lot of questions. And back to that beginning and the end being the most important, you want a strong close. You want to make it crystal clear that you want the job. So at the end of the interview, you could say something like, now that I've learned more about this position, I can see that my skills will be a perfect fit. I'd really like to work here. And if that's too direct for you, find some language that is more comfortable and natural for you. Again, this is not showing up in any way that feels unnatural or uncomfortable. It's adjusting your responses based on your comfort zone in your own personal communication style. But at the end of the conversation, you do want to let them know you want the job. And you want to ask, when will you be making a hiring decision? So you could say, this job sounds perfect for me. When do you think you'll be making a hiring decision? Maybe they'll say next week. You could say, would you mind if I followed up with a phone call or an email? Sure, follow up with an email. And then you get more information about how to follow up, and you let them know that you will be following up. So it's holding them accountable. And then of course you want to follow up immediately with a thank you note, reiterating something positive from the conversation and the key points that make you the perfect fit for the job. Remember, they're interviewing a lot of people here. It's hard for them to remember everybody. You're helping them by reminding them of some of the key points of your conversation. Well, that is it for my acing your virtual interview tips today. And I would love to hear your questions and continue the conversation. And again, the comprehensive interview guide is available at nextcareercoaching.com/FGD.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. We had a ton of questions come in during the presentation, but if you still have them, feel free to leave them in the Q&A. I caught all the ones that you already left in the chat, but it's much easier, and I can guarantee that I'll get to them if they're in the Q&A. So feel free to drop them there. Just one question that I see right here from Jennifer on kind of what you just said. Are email thank you notes as acceptable as written thank you notes nowadays?
I think they are. Of course, the written note is an extra touch, so it's kind of a take it to the next level strategy. So you could do both.
Yeah, agreed. I think especially if you're trying to follow up immediately, your email is going to be your best bet, especially right now where, who knows how long that letter could take to get there.
Absolutely. And back to the point about the interviewer, the hiring manager, they're seeing so many people. So more reminders are not bad. I often say that by the time we feel like we're over communicating and being a pest, that's about the time that we've just pierced the awareness level of the hiring manager, because again, we can't really, unless we've been in that role, it's hard to even imagine the volume of communications someone in that role has. So they need to hear from you 2 or 3 times to even notice.
Exactly. Another question here is it okay to ask at the beginning of the interview, if you can take notes, or is it not recommended since you're not looking at the camera when you're interviewing?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I would ask for sure. And so I know they'll say yes, because typically in a live interview, you do take notes. That's a common best practice. But if you started just taking notes without clarifying first, it might not be clear what you're doing, and it might be off-putting if you were looking down. So I would, instead of taking notes on a pad, like you might in a normal interview, or not normal, in an in-person interview, this is the new normal. So you could type them, just type them on your laptop.
Yeah. I also want to bring up a great advice that Matthew said. He uses a standing desk, which kind of acts as like a lectern when he's interviewing. He said it gave him a lot of power, but I also think that's a great way for you to be able to be standing upright and also taking notes, but they can see that you're taking notes. So it's not really, a shock to them. So it was great advice.
And you could also record the conversation as well. So that's another way to get the information, capture the information, but not distract the interviewer or disrupt the interview.
Interesting question here about what you can wear for an interview. This person asked, what about prints or bright colors on camera? Is that okay, or is it too distracting?
I find prints distracting, but we've got to work with what we have here. So I'm not suggesting anyone run out and buy a new wardrobe for their interview. If you're comfortable wearing prints and that's your go-to outfit, then subtle is better. And there's certain interview colors that you want to avoid. Red, you want to avoid green. Blues are really nice. So it depends on the color. You want to avoid something loud, but I always recommend also going back to the LinkedIn page, for the LinkedIn company page, and look at what people are wearing there. It will give you a lot of information. You want to look like you're going to walk into that organization and be a great fit for the team, like you're part of the team. If people are dressed in a very casual style and you show up in like your, bright red power suit, you're not going to look like a good fit. And perception is everything. First impressions are everything. So we want to just give that first impression that you are a natural fit for the organization.
Yeah. From personal experience, don't wear stripes. I've noticed that they look very funky on camera from hosting webinars. So that's just my personal experience there.
Right. Yeah. And did want to give a quick mention that because if you're in the job search, you probably don't have a lot of extra budget to spend on your wardrobe. But one good place to look is sites like ThredUp or those resale sites that you can shop online. It's inexpensive. You can get good quality stuff. They'll return it if it doesn't fit. So it is worth making a small investment in the right attire. So you're not, if you only have prints or bright colors, you're not undermining your chances of getting the role.
Yeah, exactly. I saw a note there that somebody said you need to get permission to record an interview. You do. So make sure, again, just ask at the beginning if that's okay, just the same as taking notes. And somebody also suggested you can rent some outfits. That's true as well.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Okay, and good question here is, they said, an issue I've had is the question, when can you start? It sounds so obvious, but since I'm working, I always say that I have to give the standard 2-week notice. All of a sudden I'm hearing that's not the norm anymore, and companies want people who can start immediately. So what should I do about that?
I think standard 2-week notice is fair. And I think that, if you say, because they know they know that you're currently working. And I almost think if you say, okay, I can start tomorrow, there's the understanding that you just left your previous employer high and dry. And I don't think that's going to reflect well on you. I would say I need to give my current employer 2 weeks notice. Maybe if they want you to start immediately, you can say I can start familiarizing myself with some of, the information or knowledge I need for this new role, but I need to be fair to my current employer. I don't think anyone would have an issue with that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they should be expecting you to give them the same respect in the future.
Right.
So I think telling them I need to give them 2 weeks notice is great advice.
Right.
We had so many questions about the salary question. So I think that's going to be the topic of conversation for the next few minutes.
Okay.
This question asks, how do you make your salary response not sound so awkward when a company insists on you giving a number?
Well, if you have to give a number, just say it, and look to what was your last salary. So typically I suggest that people say your last salary was 70,000, come in at 75, and you just say 75 base pay.
Exactly. And then a lot of people were asking, and a few notes. So first the notes. So people from California here, and they said if you ask the employer what the range is, apparently they have to share it by California law. So check your state laws on that, because I know it varies from state to state. And this person also said, I found that a lot of companies in California aren't even complying with that law. So again, just be on the lookout for that. And then with that question, this person asked, is it true that you shouldn't have to say your previous or current salary during the interview? And they're asking again, do they do that just so they can kind of lowball you?
Well, so they can ask what your salary expectation is. They can't ask what you're making, at least in Oregon, and I know in California as well. They can't ask what you're currently earning, but they can ask what you want to earn.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because somebody else here said I was asked what my salary was. So that might not be the best thing. And this person said they answered truthfully because they were a government employee. And because of that, their salary can be researched on the internet. Do employers, are they actually going to go and like look up what you were making?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they care about what they're going to pay you and what their budget is. So I don't necessarily think that they're going to take the time to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And some advice here. Ellie said, I tend to give a total compensation number. That's including salary and bonus. And that tends to give her a bump automatically.
Great.
So that's great advice. And then, oh my goodness, so many salary questions. In New York, you can only be asked what your salary expectations are, not what your salary was. I think that's the case for a lot of states, but again, check your laws wherever you live. And then this person asked, is it better, or are there pros and cons to giving a range for your salary or giving a single number?
Well, the idea with the range is that the total package, it gives you the opportunity, because if you just give a number, you don't know what your vacation is. You don't have much negotiation room. If you give a range, now all of a sudden it's a conversation about, okay, here's my base pay, bonus, vacation time, which is compensation as well. So it gives you more of an opportunity to discuss and negotiate the whole package versus just like, here's your base pay. Okay, you agreed to that. Now you're on the hook, no matter how much vacation we give you or benefits.
Exactly. And speaking of benefits, we had an anonymous attendee ask, when the recruiter asks what your base salary expectation is that the right moment when you should also be discussing those benefits, or do you wait till the end to bring that up? Do you save it for another interview?
I always suggest just answering that salary question and moving on, because you don't want to derail the conversation and go down a rabbit hole. So absolutely ask the benefits question when you're extended the offer. At that time, that's when you can do your negotiation. So I would wait until the negotiation happens to really do the negotiation. Wait until you've gotten the offer and you're further down the road. The benefit to waiting too is the more time they've put into, the more time the recruiter and hiring manager have put into interviewing you, the further down the path you are in the interview process, the more they've invested in you and the more they want you. At that time, when you're one of the final contenders or the final contender, they're a lot more open to negotiation because they want you at that point.
Yeah.
In the beginning,
exactly.
they don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I think we nailed all of the salary questions. If you still have more, feel free to leave them in the Q&A, but I see a lot of other questions that I do want to get to. So let's go back quickly. I see one question here about the way you dress for an interview, and I think you explained this so well. So if you just want to re-emphasize it, they asked, if you're saying the company is very casual, should we dress equally as casual? But I think you explained it a little bit differently than that.
Yeah, so a step up. So you want to show that, yes, you are in casual mode, or you're a casual person, you're a great fit for the company, but you also made an extra effort for this interview. You really want to work there. So you stepped it up to show up for this interview.
Yeah.
So I had one candidate who really wanted to work at Les Schwab, the tire company. So he was coming from another industry, so it was a big pivot. So he researched what do they wear, and they all wore these polo shirts. It was almost like a uniform. It wasn't a uniform, but it looked like one. And with a lot of companies, you'll see that's the case. People dress very similarly. So he did the polo shirt and a jacket over it. So he didn't go suit and tie. He wanted to look like one of them, but he wanted to look like he dressed up for the occasion as well.
Yeah, Elizabeth explained it great, because if you overdress, you're also showing that you don't know the company and you didn't look into their company culture, and that can send off the wrong signal. You might think it's great to wear that power suit, but it might not be.
It might scare people.
Exactly. Awesome question here from Victoria. She asked, how do you judge the reactions of the interviewers when you're looking at the camera for a virtual interview and not necessarily their faces?
Well, so you're looking at the camera when you're speaking, and I would glance, subtly glance down to just see, how are they responding? Is this resonating with them? Do they look confused? Do they look engaged? Are they off in left field somewhere? So yeah, you want to just kind of subtly, discreetly glance just to see how they are reacting, so you can just adjust accordingly. It's an art and a science. And when you can position your camera really close to your laptop, you can there are ways you can stage your camera and your laptop so they're not far apart. If they're far apart, it's going to be obvious, but if they're really close and you're just slightly glancing down, it'll be so subtle they won't notice.
Yeah, that's a great point. You don't want your camera. I have coworkers who do this because they're not interviewing, obviously, but they have their cameras over here and they're talking that way the entire time, and it's pretty funny. But you probably don't want to do that for an interview.
Right.
Okay, another question here. When you don't know the actual email address of the hiring manager, what do you do? And is it okay to send a thank you note via LinkedIn Messenger?
If that's the only opportunity you have, it absolutely is. But sometimes you can get it from the recruiter and ask them to pass it on. So you probably have an email address from someone that you were in communication with to set up the email. You can always ask them to forward your email to the hiring manager.
Perfect. Interesting questions. They kind of go together. They're both from Rupa 1216. They asked, sometimes my interviewers are super casual and they want to start off with some chit chat in the beginning. And I have my key strengths and stories prepared, but I haven't prepared any small talk. Do you have any tips on how I can engage them? And kind of with that, if they're not so chatty, how do you bring up those commonalities, and how do you kind of like start the conversation yourself? So I guess if you could speak to both aspects of that.
Sure. Well, if they're making small talk in the beginning, go with the flow. Just, let them lead, pick up the cues where you can to respond. It's always helpful to talk about, you can look at some of those questions that are in the comprehensive interview guide. One of them is, how long have you been with the company? What do you like about working here? Another question that comes from Vanessa Van Edwards, who is an author of the book Captivate about how to make small talk. And I highly recommend that book. It's really helpful for situations like this. Again, the book is called Captivate, and it's Vanessa Van Edwards. And so she's got a lot of conversation opener questions, networking questions. And one of them is, what was the best part of your week this week? What is something that happened to you this week that you're really excited about? Or what are you working on right now that you're really excited about? So asking questions that bring people to a place of enthusiasm, where what they'll be willing and excited to share, positively focused questions. But again, don't rely upon thinking in the moment during the interview. Prepare in advance. Prepare small talk questions in advance, just like you would interview questions.
Exactly. I think that's also a really great way to get to know the company culture a little bit better, because I've found throughout my interviews that just by asking the interviewer what they like about their job, I can actually tell if they like their job or not. It's a very easy way to see if they're scrambling for an answer. You're asking the question, what do you like about working here? And they can't come up with anything, or they said the lunch food is good. Well, I don't know how great the culture is. Whereas some interviewers are like, I love my coworkers. I love the work I do. And they go off on 10 different things. It's a great way to get them talking. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And it's a great way to get yourself more enthused about the job too during the interview.
Yes. An anonymous attendee asked, is it appropriate to ask the recruiter or the HR department in advance of the interview what is suitable attire for the interview?
Absolutely. And I should have mentioned that. Ask the recruiter everything. So find out as much as you can about the role from the recruiter. The recruiter wants you to get the job. The recruiter's done the work of finding you. They believe you're a good fit for the role. Now they want to bring it home and have you interview really well. So because that reflects positively on them. So ask them as much as you can about what to wear, what kinds of questions they'll be asking. Will it be a technical interview or a behaviorally focused interview? You can ask them that. You can ask them what's the best way to prepare for it in terms of preparing your answers. So as much information as you can get from the recruiter, definitely ask.
This is an interesting question for Beth, and I think I'm going to expand upon it because I think a lot of people are probably wondering this, but now that we're all working in this kind of remote world for a lot of positions, they're going to be remote for who knows how long in the future. Do you have any tips on updating my telecommunications and remote working skills in my resume, and also how you can talk about those during an interview? It's one thing to say I'm a great remote worker, but how do you kind of show that through stories or anecdotes or prove it?
Right. Well, one way could be to talk about how you quickly adapted to this new virtual style. And I know with a lot of the people that I'm helping to prepare for interviews or helping to prepare for their job search, most of them have worked remotely to some extent. So if you look back at your experience, if you worked with virtual teams in the past, a lot of us work with virtual teams, perhaps they're in other countries, other parts of this country, but they're off-site. There's usually someone on your team or in your organization that you've worked with virtually. So think about those times, and those count. Think about all the times when you maybe were on the road and you worked remotely, or the times that you worked from home. Those are all experiences that you want to relate as successful virtual experiences. And in terms of practicing remote work, essentially it's just getting a schedule. I think you and I talked about this at the beginning, Sam. The best way to start practicing and getting comfortable with remote work is to start developing a schedule for yourself. So start developing a strong daily routine. Speak to that, get it going. Get up at the same time and do, your work related activities, whether it's your job search or other work activities, networking that you do, and start really working to a schedule. And that's a great opportunity to share those best practices that you've developed and are implementing based on this new situation.
Yep, perfect advice. Another question here from Kalechi. I'm sorry if I hurt your name there. She asked, how long should you wait to follow up with a recruiter if they haven't replied to your first email where you're asking for feedback? if you know you didn't get the job?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I would say a couple of days. I mean, unfortunately, because of the laws in some states, recruiters may not give you feedback on that, why you didn't get the job. They're really wary of saying the wrong thing or, legal issues. So you won't always get feedback. Sometimes you will. I would say probably about 10% of the time you will, based on the candidates I work with. So, give it a couple of shots. If they don't respond, they're probably not going to.
And then actually a follow-up question to that I see from Anne, if HR is not getting back to you after whatever amount of time, is it okay to contact the hiring manager, or should you just move on at that point?
I'd almost say just move on. It's hard to get feedback as much as, we wish we could, because it would really help us to prepare for our next interview. It's unlikely that you'll get it if you haven't gotten it from the recruiter.
Question here from Jay Walton that I really like. They said, what would you say is the biggest takeaway or difference between face-to-face and virtual interviewing?
I would say the biggest difference is that in person, you're able to leave a much stronger impression. You're able to connect more on an individual level. You're going to show up more powerfully in person generally. So that's why we have to work a little bit harder on our remote interview to really craft those stories, have those real-time story examples of the work that you've done, because you are missing some of that in-person connection that you normally have. So just step up the enthusiasm, the examples, be memorable.
Yeah, it's also important to remember that you're not the only one who's interviewing virtually at this point. If they're doing it with you, they're doing it with every single candidate. So while it might be harder to make that connection, it puts you all on kind of an even playing field in a way. So you're not at a specific disadvantage.
No.
So you just got to step up and prove yourself, and you really shine, and stand out from the other candidates.
Yep, exactly.
We are almost at the time, but I have one more question that I think is kind of interesting. It's from an anonymous attendee. They said, if an interviewer asks about your political affiliation or makes any reference to it, and you might have different affiliations from them or the company, how do you get around that question or that conversation with grace and without jeopardizing your chances of securing the job?
I would just say, well, first of all, it's a very inappropriate question.
Yes, it is. Let's start there.
Oh, thank you for asking. I prefer to keep my political views to myself, but I know there's a big conversation right now. There's a lot of conversations out there, and that's something I'm just really not that comfortable discussing with other people.
Yeah, and if it's a comment, just pivot,
Yeah.
like,
Exactly.
So in terms of, just bring it back to the job at hand,
Right.
Just pivot.
Yeah.
Okay, we are just about at time. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for all your help and advice today. I think this was a really great webinar, and I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you, Sam. It's such a pleasure to be here, and good luck to everybody with your virtual interviews. Go ace them.
Yes, good luck. You got this. Have a great rest of your week and stay safe. We'll catch you at the next one. Bye.